You're out here today unveiling a climate change plan. Today we also learned that the president skipped the climate change portion of the G7 in France. How do you make this an issue? How do you speak to the part of the country that agrees with President Trump that this stuff isn't important enough to even sit down and have a conversation about?
Well, more and more Americans are waking up to the fact that climate change is an existential threat. And the fact that July was the hottest month in history certainly, I think, got the attention of many Americans I talked to. The proportion of Americans that don't think climate change is a serious threat is shrinking all the time. Donald Trump does not speak for the American people on this one, that's for sure.
Is looking at this president part of the reason you included this idea of a constitutional amendment in your climate plan to lock in whatever changes a Yang administration would make?
Well, we have to know that we're going to be at this for decades, that climate change is not going to be addressed overnight. And so if you know that's going to be an ongoing part of the country's mission, then putting it in the Constitution makes a lot of sense. But yeah, part of it was that, you have to try and future-proof any changes, and Donald Trump's a sign of just how far we have to go sometimes.
I think your comment on the debate stage, you talked about it here, it's in your plan, about moving to higher ground, both literally and figuratively, raised some eyebrows. Is that alarmist, or is that really just where we are right now in the climate debate?
I'm a very evidence-driven and data-driven guy, and the data, unfortunately, paints a very dark picture about where we're heading on climate change. UN just released a study last week that said that we'd be okay if 80% of us went vegetarian immediately, and that's not just U.S., that's like worldwide. Greenland is melting at the rate projected in 2070 today. So I wish I had better news to report. If I thought that we were going to be okay if we went about business as usual, I would say that, but that's just not the case.
So you think communities like this are literally physically going to have to move back from the water's edge in the not too distant future?
They're already seeing it. I was talking to a city official here who said that there are 2,000 residential homes that are flooding regularly now, which flooding means regularly means 26 times a year. So imagine living in a building and having it flood 26 times a year.
Every other week for the rest of your...
Yeah, I think you have to move the building at that point. But most Americans just don't have the resources to actually move back from the shoreline. So that's where we have to help.
That ties into, part of what I think is interesting about your plan is it does tie back into the universal basic income concept. Is that part of where you see the linkages between these issues?
Well, to me, it's hard to galvanize energy around climate change when 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck and almost half can't afford an unexpected $500 bill. They have this day-to-day mentality. And so if you get the boot off of people's throats, get their heads up, let them know their future is assured, then we can speed up on climate change. So you're right, it is related to the freedom dividend of $1,000 a month.
One of the other things that jumped out at me at your plan is you talk about using nuclear power as a bridge technology. Most developed countries are moving away from nuclear power. Japan stopped using it, Germany's stopping using it. Why should the U.S. invest in nuclear power now when the rest of the world's going in a different direction?
Well, the technology's come a long way. And if you look at the amount of energy the U.S. needs in the time frame, to me, nuclear needs to be at least on the table as a piece of the puzzle. So, we need to be adaptable. And the new thorium reactors, I'm happy to say, are much safer, much cleaner, and much more efficient than anything that we had from the last generation.
Nothing in the plan about nuking hurricanes, though, right?
No, or Mars. Sorry, Elon, but...
Okay, we'll stay away from that.
I don't know if you knew what I'm talking about there.
On nuking Mars? I missed it. I missed that. I was good on nuking hurricanes.
So Elon suggested that we nuke Mars to try and make it more habitable.
Oh, good. Okay, well, great. I want to ask you about the race more broadly here. Forgive me if this sounds disrespectful. I don't mean it that way, but I think when you got into this race, people looked at you as kind of a single-issue candidate, right? You were the guy talking about universal basic income, writing checks to people. Now you're going to be on the debate stage in September when there are sitting governors, sitting senators, folks who cannot get off the ground. What is it about your message or your platform or the way you're doing this that you think is resonating when some of these folks who've been at this game in politics for decades can't succeed at all?
Well, I think Americans recognize the truth when they hear it. And when you look around towns in New Hampshire, you see 30% of Main Street stores closing their doors forever. And why is that? Because Amazon's soaking up $20 billion in business a year and paying zero in taxes. So we need to spread the gains from this economy as quickly as possible. We need to solve the problems that got Donald Trump elected. I think that's why I'm doing so well, is that I'm talking about the real problems that Americans can see around them.
You think traditional politicians aren't really doing that?
I don't think they are. The only way someone like Donald Trump could have become our president is if Americans had lost faith in government solving their problems on the ground. And even now, when you look at my solutions versus other solutions, I'm looking at putting $1,000 a month in the hands of every American adult. That would make us stronger, healthier, mentally healthier, help our kids learn. It would rejuvenate Main Street communities here in New Hampshire and around the country. That's a game changer. A lot of the things other politicians are talking about would just nibble at the margins.
When Seth Moulton dropped out of the race the other day, he said he sees this as essentially a three-way competition now between Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren. I mean, obviously you're in the mix, you're on the debate stage, but how do you get from 2% to 15% or 20% where you're in the mix when we're having this conversation 5 or 6 months from now?
Well, one poll had me at 5% in New Hampshire. We're growing all the time. We've raised more in the last 6 weeks than we did all of the previous 3 months. So we're growing at the best time possible. But one poll had only 2 candidates that voted for Donald Trump. 10% or more of them would vote for the Democratic candidate, and I was one of them. So Democrats right now very badly want to beat Donald Trump. More and more people are going to wake up to the fact that I'm the best candidate with the best chance to do so. The other candidate that they'd support at 10% or higher is Bernie Sanders.
All right, that's all I got. I think that's a good spot.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you,
the time.
Appreciate it.